Hello, my name is Oliver Brackenbury of Brackenbury Books. I'm also the editor of New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. And this video is just a quick little thank you to everybody for getting us to 500 backers before we're even halfway through the campaign. It's so encouraging, it's so validating. Myself and the others who work with me on the magazine are very grateful for this. Thank you. So, yeah, as a fun little treat, I thought, what if I read for you a little story out of one of our issues from last year? An issue so white it throws off the balance on the camera here. Using this handy bookmark ribbon, which we have on all our hardcovers, I will find my place. And what I would like to read to you all is a short story, one of my own, which I do not for ego, but because this way I don't have to email anybody and figure out, audio book rights or something. I can just read my story. So it keeps it nice and simple, not an ego trip here. Yeah, that story is called Something Oath-like, and it was a bonus story that was added to issue 3 last year because folk were cool about sharing the magazine. This year, my lord, you've already shared our Blue Sky post, our original one about the launch of the crowdfund, almost 300 times, unlocking a bonus short story in all 3 issues and a bonus poem by Bryn Hammond. And we're getting close there to 300 shares, at which point another bonus poem will be unlocked. I'm so excited. It's so fun. Again, thank you all so much for this marvelous energy. But yes, so something I was like was like a bonus last year, a little unpaid dealie. I just put it in there as a fun extra treat as a thank you. And so I'm going to double down on using it as a thank you by reading it to you. Well, you know what? I've got these fun little things in my fun little amateur video making software here. So let's do it. Oh, and then there we go. Good grief. I've worked on like decent budget like film productions, but here I am typing it into my webcam software. All right. Now I won't blame you if you move me to another tab or look at another tab or whatever, you just need the words. It's all good. But yeah, here we go. Here's a little story for you as my thanks for 500 backers. Something Oath-like by Oliver Brackenbury, featuring an illustration by the artist known as Krong, which I probably put in the thumbnail for this, and you can see in glorious real time, whatever, if you get the magazine. Issue 3, yeah. Anyway, here we go. Skittering stones heralded a heavy-hoofed fool failing to step softly. Ahmed turned his head, double-checking the number of tombs sworn. All 5 still lay where he'd bested them, and opened their bodies with his adze, the same tool he'd since used to scrape and pry, unsealing the doors they'd guarded. A woman checked around the pillar he'd first thought of hiding behind. She was a pillar herself, and Ahmed knew he'd need both hands, well brawned as his limbs were, to carry the beaked warhammer, this pale, red-crowned wrestler, this great-girthed giraffe of a warrior, balanced in one freckled coconut crusher. Behind him, a desert rat squeaked, drawing the woman's gaze to Ahmed. Thief? He asked. Ha! I'm here to stop one, she replied in unschooled Alubun, pointing the hammer his way. Ahmed nodded as he ran his fingers through the lengthy curls of his beard, flicking its hempseed oil into her pale, mismatched eyes. Ahmed smirked, then charged past, out of the sun, and into the tomb. Enraged as she was, her footsteps weren't quiet. Ahmed wasn't sure he was hiding much better. A maze was not one of this tomb's protections for its royal occupants, so there were few turns he could take to obscure the light and smoke from the straggleweed torch he'd needed to strike. No, trying to hide like this wouldn't work at all. Turn and fight? He hadn't made it to middle age by simply running at warriors 2 heads taller than himself. Coming to the next chamber, he knew he had only moments to plan. Ducking as she entered, the pale giant squinted at where Ahmed had left his torch upon the ground, at the far end of the sandstone chamber. Its light reached upward to stroke the hanging golden face mask of Belteshazzar the Shrewd, to writhe within its sapphire eyes. Blue cloak sweeping crescents in the floor's thick covering of dust, the woman advanced. A desert rat ran behind her, stopping to look at Ahmed in his hiding place in a narrow closet behind the eastern wall, peering through the hanging mask of Zima, the legitimate. Ignoring the little creature with its big ears, Ahmed focused on the black male barbarian. She stepped like an elephant trying to tiptoe, stopping 3 large floor stones shy of the torch. The corner of her mouth twisted into a wry grin as she reached out with her hammer, with its tree trunk of a handle, to tap the stone on which the torch lay. Hardwood kissed stone, then silence. Anmod raised an eyebrow as the woman scratched her stomach, then tapped the stone just before the one bearing his torch. Another tap, then silence. Pardon me. Anmod's heart leapt when she spun around, almost on point, to see if he was sneaking up behind her. The desert rat, joined by one of its fellows, tried to leap away from her and landed on its behind, undignified. The woman chuckled at this, then turned back to take a bold step forward. Anmod nodded to himself as the stone closest to her, third from the torch, crumbled into what fast became the edge of a pit made to swallow interlopers. A 30 cubits fall would make a broken mess, even from one as robust as her. Her scream had barely begun when, satisfied, Anmod pulled on the iron rod in his 1 cubit deep closet of stone. The 2 cubit diameter disc of bronze on which he stood rotated, along with a section of wall, bringing him back into the chamber. Zima the legitimate now lay behind the wall, her sanguine gaze replaced by the satisfied eyes of Anmod the victorious. Well, Anmod the surprised. The dreadful hammer's beak, driven into the stone where his torch still lay, had saved her. One chalky choker squeezed the hammer's haft, with her other fish-belly basher already clambering up toward the freshly made ledge. There was a single cubit's width between the pit and the walls, necessary for slaves to reset the trap with purpose-made stones kept nearby. Anmod could finish her with one deft throw of his adze, yet he might need it for whatever came next. So he crab-walked around the pit, keen to strike her as a fisherman clubs a catch with his oar. By the time he was within reach of her, the ivory idiot had already put one elbow up on the stone, shifting her weight onto it so she could wield the hammer in a wild swing at his feet. When Ahmed's sandals hit the floor, his heels were far too close to the ledge for comfort. She spoke. To swing at me is to risk momentum carrying you into the pit. To finish climbing up is to give me a safer angle from which to strike, Ahmed pointed out. I could take the blow on my shoulder if I turned my mail shirt to you in time. Or I could crack your crown. Or we could both flail and fight and risk slipping into oblivion. Or we could stay as we are and imagine all the different ways this stalemate could be resolved. Ahmed suggested, hoping her arm would tire. My arms won't tire any time soon, thief. How had this dullard read him so easily? Before my legs, I suspect. Not before my squire returns with the local guard, she replied. Surrender now, thief, and I'll ask they show mercy. At most, I shall let them remove a single finger. You keep calling me a thief. Ahmed slung his adze in his heavy leather belt. A thief would be planning to leave this tomb. I do not. Her salmon lips stopped slapping. My name is Ahmed. I am Vo. Vo, why do you care what I do here? What possible connection do you have to the royal family? None, she answered. Must a warrior have a personal connection to those she would protect from killers or thieves? I spotted you from a distance as you fought those guards, and I knew what I must do. Ahmed considered her lineless face, realizing she'd seen few summers, and wondered what fables her head was filled with. As he did so, her righteous expression settled like water long after a stone had been tossed in. If I help you up, will you let me show you something? Soon after, Ahmed had taken Vo behind Zima the Legitimate, through a short corridor, then turned down a long flight of stairs. Vo became comfortable with their no longer being at odds. She must have, given how, with no prompting by Ahmed, she began telling him her life story. Something about an island, a blood feud she escaped to hunt a sorcerer, and walking the path of heroism. Having lived a landlocked life, Ahmed found the island engaged his imagination the most. To him, water had always been a precious thing. Fancy being surrounded by so much it was like a prison. By the time they reached the bottom of the stairs, Ahmed felt as though the entire weight of the desert lay above their heads, and, judging by Vo's furtive glances upward, she felt it too. A faint echo joined his steps as Ahmed used his shrinking bundle of straggleweed to light a string of dusty torches mounted in bronze sconces along the nearest wall. By the great gardener! Ahmed chuckled at Vaux's slack-jawed awe. He supposed this grand chamber, many times even Vaux's height, with its looming statues of the gods, precious gems as populous as pebbles, and gold leaf stretched across the entirety of a 2-story tall ziggurat sitting in the center, royal bodies at its flat peak, would impress him too, if he were ignorant of all the very common bodies ground up in its construction. So you have no intention of stealing any of this? Or of leaving here? Vaux asked. Why? Well, I'd intended to enlighten you, but your own story seemed to interest you so much more. Moving forward, Ahmed ignored the steps of the ziggurat, instead padding leftward around its base. There he found a long row of exposed bodies, with little in the way of mummification to preserve them, and no inscriptions to say who they were. They had served the royal family, and that was all it had been decided one needed to know of them. He stopped at one body in particular, and ran his finger along the still visible nub where a broken collarbone hadn't been set quite right. Careful not to put his weight on the body, Ahmed crouched and embraced it. Embraced him. Though, this is my... Ahmed stopped and wiped the moisture from his eyes. The desert rats had followed, and now no less than a dozen pairs of their large ears could be counted. Along with Vaux, they all watched him, waiting. Ahmed's great-uncle had told him so very many things before his death. There was one story. Vaux, draw your hammer! Stretching and wobbling like the sound of someone playing a saw, flickering in and out of existence like a flame in a high wind as they did so, the desert rats grew. What are they? Vaux cried, leaping out from her place among these pliant, rat-like perversions. Moments later, by the time she'd taken up a fighting position at the base of the ziggurat stairs, it was done. Each rat now stood on its hind legs, a little taller than Vaux herself. Their furry limbs were swollen, entwined with ropey muscles suggesting speed as much as strength. Whiskers, claws, teeth, all struck out far from their profane forms. Then the smallest, perhaps halfway between Vaux and Ahmed in height, opened its mouth. You open the way, and we are grateful, but you will not deny us. Vaux answered by swinging her hammer down at the head of the first rat thing to leap at them. It writhed in midair quickly enough to save its skull, only to have a hind paw pulped, pinning it to the ground. This was all Ahmed had time to take in before 3 more of the things were upon him, driving him back alongside the base of the ziggurat. After using her hammer's beak to peck out the heart of her freshly flat-footed opponent, Vaux faced a half-dozen others in a rearguard action, stepping backwards up the stairs, separating herself from Ahmed. Glad he hadn't thrown his adze at Vaux, Ahmed pinwheeled it in front of him, an ad hoc shield against slashing claws. A tremendous thump, and Vaux's bellow drew his eyes upward. Vaux's mail was being taxed by the teeth of the rat things who had swarmed her, pushing her down onto the steps. Their scrum had upturned an overfilled amphorae, spraying Ahmed and his attackers with a spectrum of small gemstones. The last 2 of the dozen, free of the fight, flowed over the pile of their brethren smothering the brave young islander, then hastened up the last few stairs to reach the royal bodies. Ahmed had collected nicks and scratches on his skin, giving a few bruises, and a broken foreleg in return. Now he heard a sick crunching sound through the din of battle. The 2 rat things at the top of the ziggurat were eating the Emperor's body. This terrible vision vanished as one of Ahmed's opponents palmed his face. Another's yellow incisors pierced his side, puncturing his stomach. Ahmed's blood-flecked gasps followed his body to the ground. No, not like this. He needed to be whole. Lies! The smallest rat creature cried out. The others stopped fighting, the din of battle dying down to Ahmed's wet breaths and the struggle sounds of Vaux as she labored under her half-dozen. What? the creature with its hand on Onmid's face responded. No godly power flows through me. This so-called emperor is no more divine than those freshly dead servants we fed upon earlier, before following these two into the tomb. Perhaps you've eaten the wrong part, suggested one of those assailants, struggling to keep her left wrist pressed to the stairs. No, no, I've polished off the brains, drunk the dusty heart even drier. Those are where their legends say the god's favor resides within them. You idiots, Onmid gasped. Those were lies to justify their rule, to justify enslavement of my ancestors, and furry fingers muffled his mouth. Then their owner spoke. I knew it, you gullible fool. Perhaps we need to discuss why we justify your leading the colony. Further debate was preempted by the sound of a neck being broken. Then a limp body fell, knocking aside Onmid's assailants and uncovering his vision. Vo had wriggled somewhat free from those that smothered her, to great effect. Enough! I'll answer any challenges back in our own realm, the leader called out. He and the other creatures, living and dead, flickered, stretching even further, fading as they did so, until only Vo and Onmid remained. Vo helped her compatriot, laying by the body with the sloppily set collarbone, his great-uncle, and gathering gemstones. Laying him by the body with the sloppily set collarbone, his great-uncle, and gathered gemstones underneath Onmid's pate. A burgundy brook flowing from his side, Onmid took a deep breath and opened the padded leather pouch at his hip. Oh, thank goodness. I did the rat voice there. Oh, thank goodness. What is it? A swifter ride to the next life than my disease of the flesh promises. Onmid swirled the honey-tinted contents of the vial. Sweeter and painless. Onmid thumbed out the cork. When he poured it in his mouth, Vo raised an unsure hand as if to stop him. The smell of poppies, honey, and something else filled their noses. The warmth of a mother's love grew in his chest, melting outward across his limbs. Many heavy footsteps began to be heard coming down the stairwell. My squire and the guards, Vo muttered. If only they'd been here earlier. Vo began to appear, as though on the other end of a tunnel of clear, half-melted wax. No, 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 Onmid slurred. They'll take my body away from my family, for I never served the Emperor. They wouldn't. His body's growing calmness only sharpened the panic in Onmid's mind. They will! They are obligated to! All this for nothing. The world he was leaving grew smaller, further still. Once more, Vo single-handedly raised her hammer, knuckles growing white. In a language he suspected was her own, Vo spat out something oath-like, placing herself between him and the stairs. Confident his body would stay with his ancestors, Onmid closed his eyes. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And again, thank you all so much for getting us to 500 backers. The support means the world. Anyway, if you're seeing this long after the campaign is over, don't worry about it. You can probably go to newedgeswordandsorcery.com for a link to pre-order or eventually order directly. But if you're seeing this before March 15th, and if perhaps you have not backed the campaign, then I would encourage you to follow the link I'm sure is in the video description and every post I'm sharing this on, and go to the crowdfund and check it out, see if it might be up your alley. All my persuasion of why I think it's a good idea to back it is on the page. You can go check it out there. We also have a fun trailer you can watch if you don't feel like reading. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. I'm really looking forward to all the other fun stuff we have planned for the rest of this crowdfund. And now the awkward part where I look down while I find the stop button.